this evening. Welcome to the House of Lords.
The way this evening is going to work, I wanted to have something a bit more than just a book launch. It's a celebration, but I also wanted, not least because I never really got out into the city of Basra, I wanted to ask a few experts what they thought about their time in Iraq, but whether they had any views, particularly of Basra. So that's what everyone else is here to do, and thank you very much for all the speakers who agreed to come and offer a few thoughts. Hello.
I'm Caroline.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
We've only just started. I just want to say a few words about why I wrote the book. I realised when I was giving evidence at the Iraq inquiry that the time that I'd been in Basra was actually a very special one. And I hadn't really realised that before. I thought that, you know, we were all kind of there in the period of the occupation. I thought people's experience of Iraq had been quite similar, but I was quite wrong. And I think there was about 30 or 40 of us all gathered in the room together at the QE2 Conference Centre, giving our views, and everyone had a very different Iraq experience. But I realised that that particular time in 2006 was quite perilous, and I was certainly quite afraid at times, and I thought it would be worth recording. I also wanted to write a book from a woman's point of view and from a civilian's point of view. There seems to be truckloads of books by former military people, and I thought it might be quite fun, not least because I'm a mother as well, and I think for those of you that have read the book will see that actually being a mother, surprisingly, can be quite helpful at sometimes. Certainly things like doing up the buckles in the back of a Merlin helicopter. I was remembering how it was putting my children into their car seats in the back of the car, so lots of unusual, surprising things that made it easy. The other thing that's actually perhaps a bit more serious, I'm involved with an organisation called Achilles. Mark is here, and they are doing terrific work to prepare people for going, civilians in particular, for going into dangerous situations like this. Situations where they might be exposed to trauma. And I hope that the book that I've written will be useful for anyone thinking of going into, particularly I'm thinking of Afghanistan at the moment, but anywhere where you might be working in civilian reconstruction or aid, just to understand maybe what to expect of yourself, and that, you know, if you are experiencing hypervigilance or sleepless nights when you come back, it doesn't mean that you've necessarily got post-traumatic stress disorder and you're messed up for life. It just means that, you know, it's quite natural. And I think that wasn't really, I think one of the things that may, I don't want to preempt the Iraq inquiry, but one of the things that may come out of it is that some of the civilians were less prepared for that side of things. So I hope in a way that will help. The book's been read by a handful of people now. It's been out for a couple of months. This is the first kind of official launch. I wanted to say something about a couple of people that have read the book who are not Iraqi, not diplomats, not military, have no experience at all in situations like this. They were just friends. And they said to me, one thing the book showed them was that the complexity of finding a truth within the media. And their Iraq war was entirely delivered to them through their television sets and newspapers. And if there's one thing that I'm working on now in my research is that what we're delivered through our television sets is not necessarily always the truth. Not that I'm saying it's lies, but hopefully the book will show that in a situation like Iraq, you have so many people with different agendas. We were with the British government, even the British government had different agendas. We were split up, the aid people were trying to push one story, the military certainly had a whole different way of looking at things. The Americans had a different way of looking at things. The journalists that arrived with me in Basra had an agenda themselves. They wanted to cover a particular story. They were also only had access to certain people that they could interview, and those certain people that would be willing to talk to them also might have had an agenda. And then there were Iraqi journalists who had a different agenda. Iranians you know, and the list goes on. And I think what I hope that the book shows as a whole is that there is never, ever one single truth to any situation. It's a complex web, and it's coordinating that's absolutely key. Why Basra? Well, I think obviously I was there, but I think why I wanted to extend this to being a bit more of a seminar and a talk about Basra is because Basra is so often the forgotten cousin of Baghdad, and I think we felt like that quite a lot when we were there. So I think I'm quite keen to hear from these, well, they're all gentlemen actually, I've just realised, having gone on about being a woman, that from these gentlemen about what their experiences were, particularly in Basra.
Thank you all for very interesting reflections on what was a very striking time. Very interesting, Caroline, in your reflections on your own role at the time, and obviously since then you've been through a whole variety of careers and explored the communications side of that kind of operation from a number of different positions. Private sector, public sector, and so on. I'm interested to know what you would do differently.
What would I do differently? I think really Basra for me, from a professional point of view, was the birth of me as a strategist. I didn't really understand communication strategy and what that meant until I was in Iraq. I certainly didn't understand it when I arrived. I thought I was a press officer and I had to do press conferences and write press lines and engage with journalists and a very sort of day-to-day role. And there wasn't very much to work with in terms of money and resource. And Arabic speakers were pretty thin on the ground. And I was tasked before I went to Basra with coming up with a communication strategy for southern Iraq. And leading on the coordination of that, including consulting military colleagues. When I was faced with something like 35 people in the military who were working on information ops or media ops or psychological operations, you know, and there was me, one lone civilian, it was a massive, massive task that I actually resented at first being given. It wasn't until I was threatened with a consultant to come out to help me, who had a Germanic name and was a former Royal Marine with very expensive shoes. But I thought, I don't need him, I can do it myself. And I think in the book I say that, you know, it became my kind of biggest, my evening job was putting together the strategy, and David, who's sitting next to you, is also can take the blame for some of the strategy that we spent
I've got English shoes on, by the way.
You weren't the one with the shoes, no. He was the other one. But I think there was the birth of understanding why it's important to take a strategic approach, and it's something that I'm working on now in what I'm doing. It's something that I certainly carried through this, and some might say quite boring, passion for being strategic and not just being a firefighter. So I think that's kind of the one thing that answers your question.